A couple weeks ago, someone commented and asked me to share how I make my sourdough. So here it is. I'll try to keep it short, but show all the steps. This is a double batch, so I used about 4 cups of water. And I always heat up part of that so that it's warm water. Now I'm going to add a cup of starter, again, because it's a double batch, so it's a half cup per batch. And the way I do that to measure accurately when I feel like being careful is I will actually add my starter in on top of my water and watch the water level. So in this case, I'm trying to do a cup of starter. I had a cup of water in there, and so when it hits the 2-cup mark, I know that I have put in 1 cup of starter, because it is very hard to measure starter accurately if you're doing it by itself. But putting it into water will show you the true level. And then into my mixer it goes. Of course, you could do this by hand, but I prefer to use my mixer for large batches especially. I'm going to put in 4.5 teaspoons of salt. So that would be 2 1/4 for a single batch. I'll be putting the recipe in the description, so it's easy to access again. This is coconut oil. I'm not measuring super exactly. It's about 2 tablespoons per batch. And since the water is warm, that can melt a bit. Then I'm going to add some either agave nectar or honey. You could also use sugar. This recipe calls for, I think it's 3 tablespoons. It might be 4. Again, I'm not extremely exact with this because it just isn't that exact of a science, at least not to me. I'm not worried about getting the absolute perfect possible crumb. So now I'm going to mix all those ingredients together, and then I'll start adding my flour. This is freshly milled flour, so it's going to respond a little differently. You need more liquid for freshly milled flour than you do for regular flour, or I should say white flour, because it is less dense, but it has bran in it, and the bran takes more liquid to hydrate it fully. So I'll just let that gradually mix in while I add all of my flour. Each batch takes about 5 to 6 cups worth of flour. I'm not going to do 100% whole wheat on this. I'm adding a little bit of white flour. You'll see that in a minute here. There goes the white flour. This is organic white, unbleached flour. I don't believe in using enriched, bleached flours. It's just too much junk that they put in there, and all the good stuff is taken out. So I use organic, unbleached. And now I let that knead for a while. This dough looks a little too sticky to me, but it probably just needs to knead a little longer. You can see it's sticking to my finger a little bit. Not terrible though. One of the things I'm learning about freshly milled flour is that it takes longer to hydrate, and you have to give it that time. So that means that originally, when you start making your dough, it may feel way too sticky. But if you just give it time and maybe knead it a little extra, it will eventually hydrate and be the right consistency. I've been cooking with freshly milled flour pretty much my whole life. I was probably milling it and baking with it when I first started making cookies when I was like 7. So you'd think I'd know this by now, but I'm realizing that the reason so many of my baked goods were too crumbly is because I was putting in too much flour because it just felt too wet. So I'm going to resist the urge to add more flour here and just let it knead for a while. So this is an Ankarstrom mixer. I love the Ankarstrom. It's a very sturdy, good mixer. And I'm going to turn it to 8 minutes. Let it knead just kind of on a low speed. And just kind of keep an eye on it, but I don't have to stand here and hover over it. I'm going to take this opportunity now to feed my starter. I'm not super picky about how much I feed it, but I used up most of it there, and I will be using it again in a few days. So I'm going to try and feed it as much as I reasonably can without overwhelming it. So actually, in retrospect, I probably could have fed it a little bit more, but like I said, I didn't want to overwhelm it, and this was going to be enough. So I add the water in first, mix it up, and then dump some flour through a canning funnel. Helps keep the outside of my jar clean. And mix that up too. I like my starters good and stiff, so you'll see here in a second. The texture is almost like a really stiff pancake batter or a thin bread dough, like a really sticky bread dough. And then I just set that off to stay on my counter. I do put a solid lid on, but not tightly. You can see I just put it on with one finger. This is still looking just a little bit too wet, so I'm gonna add a touch more flour. Now it's time to cover it and let it rise in a warm place. I'll just let it proof next to the wood stove for a while. Time for a quick stretch and fold. Move my focaccia dough. All right. If you get your fingers wet before doing this, or your hands wet, the dough won't stick as much. All right, sorry, this isn't a great angle, I know. I actually just stretched and folded this and then realized I accidentally turned off my camera. So, let's do it again. This has been sitting for about an hour. You're supposed to stretch and fold every 20 minutes or so for the first, you do it 3 times, I think. I usually only end up stretching and folding it once, but it turns out okay. Probably because I knead it for quite a while. Okay, and that's gonna be that. Rather pitiful stretch and fold, but that's sufficient to work the gluten. Time to see how it's risen. Ooh, looking pretty good. Nice and soft. All right, let's get that shaped. All right, I'm just gonna oil my counter. Yes, I did wipe it down. You could use oil or flour for this. I like to use oil because it's good for my countertop. Now we just dump out my dough. Given how wet this dough is, flour might have been the better way to go, but it's handling okay. It's not too terribly sticky. So I'm just going to divide it in half. And no, you don't have to have a bench scraper. For nearly my whole life, I've just divided it by hand like so. I just like the bench scraper mostly because I can use it to scrape up anything that's on the counter afterwards. All right, so now I'm just going to shape it, fold the ends in on itself a little bit, and then fold that up, pinch the center. I usually give it a roll to kind of stretch it out some. There we go, ready to go in the pan. And yes, I'm using my very non-crunchy Teflon pans today. Pretty much the only Teflon thing I use. And I use them because I love the size of these pans. So they're unusually long. This is more like a store-bought loaf length. They're long and a little skinny. So they make really nice sandwich bread. I'll just set that one on top to let it rise. And then I'll repeat the process with this one and it'll be time to bake. All right, you could set the bread dough in a warm place to rise, or you could cheat, like I'm going to do, and put it in the oven on a very low temp for a little bit. And because I know how forgetful my brain is, I'm going to set it to turn off in 5 minutes. Now we'll just let my loaves rise. All right, time to put the bread in. Just pulled my pizza out so the oven's good and hot. I'm letting it kind of cool off for a second here. All right. It should rise a little bit more in the oven. Not a whole lot.
Ow.
Is it hot?
My finger on this.
Yeah, that wasn't so smart, was it?
Nope. Hot.
Okay. Put it on 375. And I let it cool off too much. All right, we'll check on it in about 35 minutes. Time to pull it out. Pardon the Lone Ranger playing in the background. My children were watching it while I finished up. But the bread looks beautiful. And as you will see in the next clip, it turned out with a nice texture, pretty good crumb, not too crumbly. And of course you can't see in the video, but it tasted very good as well. So thank you for following along as I baked bread for the family. And I hope that this video was helpful to somebody.